This is the know before you go, and this is like just some basic avalanche awareness. Most of our natural avalanches, they're happening on days just like this, right? It's blowing 60 to 70 miles per hour on the ridgelines. It's snowing really hard. And these aren't the days that we really worry about people getting caught in avalanches. Because most people are skiing inbounds, skiing the trees, right, so they can see. Or they're at home having hot cocoa with their family and friends, waiting on the storm to pass. The days we really worry about are 24 to 48 hours after the storm. And that's when about 90% of our avalanche accidents are occurring. And what happens, it snows a lot, people start jumping onto steep slopes before the snow has had time to just like settle on the slopes, right? And this is when people are seeing other people ski those slopes and get away with it, and they start jumping into that terrain, and that's when the accident occurs. What will happen is, after the storm and the sun comes out, it's like classic Utah, right? Just out of bounds, just on the other side of the road boundary, in the side country, there's fresh snow. Everything's been skied out in bounds. So people start rushing out of those gates before the snow, again, has had time to just relax and settle on the slope. What happens is we get one or two turns into the slope, and maybe we change aspect a little bit. So slope gets a little bit steeper, we change aspects, and then we trigger the avalanche. And when it breaks, it shatters all around us. And at this point, we are going for a really nasty ride, and we're staring down the barrel of a really, really nasty avalanche. And it doesn't really matter what we recreate on in the mountains, like whether we're on snowshoes, skis, snowboard, or snowmobiles, we have to always be aware of the changing conditions, especially on a sled, right? Because we're covering like hundreds of miles in a day. And so always paying attention to the winds, always paying attention to the sun, and how much is it snowing, or how much has it snowed. What happens is we start recreating on small angle slopes, and then we start pulling the tail a little bit, right? We start going a little bit higher, get a little bit higher than our friends, or just on the other side of the road boundary, maybe we push it a little bit further. The avalanche doesn't know whether you're the first person on the slope or whether you're the 100th person on the slope. All you have to do is find a weak point in the snowpack. You find that weak point, and then the avalanche shatters all around you, right? You're off to the races, basically. So just because you see tracks on a slope does not necessarily mean it's always safe. And we can travel every single day in the mountains safely just by using safe travel techniques, using ridgelines, and making sure that there's no steep slopes above us. When we initially trigger the avalanche, it's like our friend coming up from behind us and pulling a rug out from underneath our feet. We fall really quick and we lose all control. We can throw our poles up and try to alert our partners, but we are traveling through trees, we're traveling over rock bands. Avalanches pick up speeds of 60 to 80 miles per hour within a matter of seconds, right? So we lose all control. It's like being put in a washing machine, is a good analogy. You don't know which way is up, and you don't know which way is down. And then when you are buried in the snow, you can't dig yourself out of an avalanche, right? You can't even move your little finger. You have to rely on your friends to dig you out. This is the scariest part, right? The rescue. And this is like why this program was started, right? We're trying to avoid this altogether. The scariest part is when your friend's buried and you're in a rush, you're in a panic to find them underneath the snow. And shoveling. Shoveling is what's going to take the longest. Finding someone with a beacon and a probe can happen pretty quick if you're dialed. But shoveling someone out from underneath the snow, the avalanche debris, it sets up like concrete, so it sets up really hard, and it's very, very difficult to dig through. It's not like shoveling your driveway in the morning or getting the snow off your car. It takes a lot of effort to dig through concrete debris. So say I'm buried in an avalanche, and my friend finds me within 15 minutes. I have a 70% chance of survival. And the reason that this starts at 70% and not at 100% is because 1/4 of us is going to die of trauma. So that's hitting trees and hitting rocks on the way down, right? Notice that this really decreases. So at 30 minutes, if I'm found, I have a 20% chance of survival. And not at 120 minutes, if I'm not on top of the snow at that point, unfortunately, I'm not coming out alive. The 3 pieces of avalanche gear that you must carry when you're in the backcountry are the avalanche transceiver, the beacon, which you find your partner underneath the snow with, the probe, you find the burial depth, and then the shovel, of course, is what we dig them out with. The avalanche airbag, we actually have them right behind us, right? So the avalanche airbag, you pull the trigger, makes your surface area bigger, allowing you to float to the surface. But this is not going to save you from hitting trees, right? Like on the way down. Or this is going to save you from going over a big cliff band. This is like going to work in the most like perfect scenario. In a wide open bowl, you trigger an avalanche and all the debris kind of fans out. But when all the debris goes to one area or into a group of trees, the airbag really isn't going to do anything, right? and the Avalanche. If I can keep this thing in my mouth, in theory, it's going to give me an extra 50 minutes to survive underneath the snow. But again, I trigger the Avalanche. It's like being put in a washing machine. Keeping this thing in your mouth is pretty much impossible. Anybody can buy the rescue gear, right? The beacon, the probe, and the shovel. But we have to practice with it. Something I tell my students is that I can find someone, the two things I can control in a rescue are my beacon and my probe. If I practice with my beacon, I can find somebody pretty quick, within like 2 minutes. And I can locate them with my probe pretty quick. But something I can't control in a rescue is how deep they're buried, right? So I practice with my beacon, I practice with my probe, and I do a lot of push-ups and sit-ups, so I make sure I can find my partner within that 15-minute time frame. These beacon bases are located at 4 different resorts throughout the state of Utah. The Canyons has one, Solitude, Snowbird, and Snow Basin. And what you do is you go into the beacon basin, you turn on the Avalanche transceiver, and it sends you looking for a beacon. You find the beacon, you probe the board, and then it sends you looking for another one. And it's a free place to go practice with your rescue gear, right? If I am not wearing a beacon in a scenario like this, do you guys think you would find me in an avalanche this big if I wasn't wearing an avalanche beacon? Everybody's shaking their heads. No, right? It'd be like finding a needle inside of a needle inside of a haystack. It's just not going to happen, right? Just outside of the resort boundaries, people think, well, I'm in the side country, right? So like ski patrol, search and rescue, I can utilize them. Like they'll come and save me. And it's true. They will come and help you. But it takes like 30 to 45 minutes to an hour to organize a rescue. So by the time they get there, like if they have to bring out the dogs and you're not on top of the snow, like unfortunately you're not coming out alive, right? So the only person that can save you is the partner that you go into the backcountry with. And that's why you got to make sure that they're dialed with their rescue skills and that you are as well. Helicopters as well. We can utilize them. They're great tools to have. But 60% of the time in the mountains during the winter, it looks like this. So they can't always fly, right? So it kind of goes back to the people you go in the mountains with, you have to trust with your own life. 90% of avalanche accidents, they're triggered by the victim or someone in the victim's party. And I really like this statistic. It tells me that avalanches are a matter of choice, not a matter of chance. If I choose to recreate an avalanche terrain on steep slopes, I can trigger avalanches. So they can be avoided altogether if I just avoid avalanche terrain. Would I trigger an avalanche on a slope like this? Yes? No? Anybody? Do you think I would trigger an avalanche? You think I could? Probably not though, right? I see the ski lift, see a lot of people skiing. I'm like more likely to break my leg or somebody else's leg in a scenario like this, right? That's why we get into the backcountry, to get away from this chaos. So 99.9% of avalanches are triggered in the backcountry. So just beyond that little rope boundary. So when I'm skiing in bounds, I know that I'm safe, that the patrol has been doing the work in the morning. But as soon as I step beyond that magic little rope line, I am stepping into the Stone Age. There's nobody out there doing avalanche control work for me. I have to be my own avalanche expert. Again, UDOT in the mornings, they're out when they close the roads, shooting down the avalanche path so that when I drive up the canyons, I know I'm safe. And again, the same thing with ski patrol. So when the terrain opens in bounds, and I go skiing with my friends in bounds, right? I know that I'm safe because they've been shooting down the avalanches in the morning. So this is probably the most important thing that I talk about today. Avalanche terrain. What is it? How do I recognize it? And basically, how do I avoid it, right? The places I go in the summer, I can't always go in the winter, right? All these big bowls turn into big avalanche terrain traps, and all these cornices get very dangerous. Would you guys consider this avalanche terrain? Yeah, right? Pretty obvious. Slides all the time. Basically slides almost every storm. This is Mount Superior up Little Cottonwood. What about this? Would you guys consider this avalanche terrain? Yeah, right? Mount Timpanogos, you can actually even see avalanches in the photos. What about that, though? Would you guys consider that avalanche terrain? No, right? And the first time I saw it, I'm like, dude, who built a cabin in avalanche terrain? So back in 2004, there was a guy from Houston, Texas. He flew in to visit his friend in Park City. And they had dinner, they had drinks on Main Street. And then it was like a full moon, so they wanted to go snowshoeing, basically. And they started walking up this drainage. They weren't wearing rescue gear. And they triggered the avalanche above them. So avalanches can be triggered from a distance, right? I don't have to be like extreme skiing or snowboarding or snowmobiling to trigger avalanches. Like I can trigger avalanches 2 minutes from Park City, from downtown Main Street. They triggered it above him, and the guy was buried here. His friend ran back downtown to get rescue crews, and by the time he got back, it had been like 25 minutes. And the guy died of asphyxiation, which is just carbon dioxide buildup around your mouth, right? Which is how we die in avalanches. Had they had rescue gear, it probably would have been a lot different story, because the guy was only under like 6 inches of snow. So if you're going into the mountains, even if you're just going for a walk with your friends, like those 3 pieces of gear, if there's snow on the ground, like you really need them. You must carry the avalanche beacon, the probe, and the shovel. So slope steepness. This is like one of the most important things in the avalanche game, right? Because at 30 degrees and below, it's just not steep enough to really like pull the slab off the mountain, right? It's just not steep enough. At 50 degrees and above, especially in an intermountain climate like we are here in Salt Lake, basically it's just too steep for that slab to form on the mountain. But between 35 and 45 degrees is where all avalanches occur. And that's like our black diamonds at a ski resort. So I carry around an inclometer. You can actually get an app on your phone now. There's many different ways to measure the slope, but it's an inclometer or a protractor. And I'm constantly shooting slopes with my friends and my colleagues because it tells me if it's between those degrees, it can avalanche, right? And I can go out every single day, even in high avalanche danger, and have a blast just skiing 30-degree slopes. So again, that's like, besides my beacon, that's pretty much my favorite tool in my bag. So this avalanche path is up Provo Canyon. And if I wanted to get to the top of this avalanche path and I wanted to ski down it, can somebody tell me, like one of you guys, tell me how I would get up there? The best way to get to the top? Would I go straight up it? No, right? I could go left or I could go right. And this goes back to like traveling safely, right? So if I go left, see these sparse anchors, these trees right here that are sparse anchors? If I just manage and go around those little open snowfields, I can get to the top of it safely. But if I want to know that I'm safe, I go right. And I just stay in those super thick trees. I know it has an avalanche. Those trees are hundreds of years old. But it allows me to get to the top, and I can poke out into that snowfield as I go up, and I can kind of look at the snow and get a sense of what the snow's doing on that snowfield before I choose to ski it. So trees, they act as anchors. They help anchor the slope. But if they are sparse enough to where you can slide through them comfortably, snowboard, ski, basically if you can like walk through them comfortably, so can an avalanche. So like this photo here, that slope could avalanche. And so they allow you to get to the top. They're your best friends, but they also can turn into your worst enemy. And trees give a lot of people a false sense of security. They think, oh, I'm thick, I'm in the trees, and I've seen so many accidents that are like, when the avalanche danger is really high, and we're dealing with like a persistent weak layer, people get that false sense of security in the trees, and you can still trigger avalanches. So again, they can turn into baseball bats, right? Huge consequence. Like you hit a tree going 40 or 50 miles per hour, it's lights out. Like you're probably not walking away from it. Another huge consequence are cliff bends, right? And it doesn't even take a big cliff to kill me. Like I hit my head on a rock going over a cliff bend, I can be done, right? So cliffs, rocks, always paying attention to what's below me, they're a huge consequence. So we teach this program to starting in 6th grade, going all the way through 12th grade. And the main thing I focus on when I'm teaching to like 6th graders, all the way up through like their senior year, are terrain traps, because they're so easily overlooked. Here in Utah, it is really easy to get into avalanche terrain without even really recognizing it. And unfortunately, like every year, one person goes walking up a terrain trap, just like the Park City accident, and they trigger a slide from above them. And so what happens is even a small avalanche in the terrain traps can bury me deep. So I'm like walking up the terrain trap, I trigger an avalanche above me, and all the snow, it filters to one area. It doesn't have like anywhere to like run out to, really fan out. So all the debris piles up deep, I'm buried deep. The avalanche airbag doesn't really matter in this scenario. And then again, shoveling is what takes the longest. So I could find somebody quick, but if they're 8 feet deep, it's like, you better really hit the gym hard, or you better really have a lot of people helping you dig them out. Terrain traps are really easy to get into, but they should always be avoided. Also, I guess I should point this out as well. If I am in the mountains and I'm skiing with my friends, and one of us triggers an avalanche, and they're not wearing a beacon, or I'm like looking for like likely places to probe, I always want to probe on the upsides of trees. People hit trees and they get buried generally on the upside of trees. They want to like wrap around the tree. These chutes and gullies and couloirs, they're really fun to ski, right? You got these big rock walls above you, but recognize like where does all the snow filter? So before I go skiing a slope, I'm thinking about those consequences. Like, am I going to get taken into a stand of trees? Am I going to get taken into cliff bands? Or am I going to get taken into these gullies, into these depressions? Is the snow going to pile up deep, basically? Jumps are fun to build in the backcountry as well. But it's so important to pay attention to like what you're jumping into. Because what happens is a lot of the kids and a lot of people, they go out and they build the jumps when it's nice and sunny outside, the landing's really hard, but they come back and hit them after it's snowed a lot. And heavy snowfall is a red flag, and that's when the avalanche danger rises. So pay attention to like how steep is the slope that I'm jumping into, and again, what is the avalanche danger rating that day? What did the forecast center say? And then again, once you build a jump and you have a safe location, just like the Boondockers crew, send it, right? Have a good time. Just make sure that you're not jumping into steep slopes with high avalanche danger. So my terrain checklist. What were the angles between what and what do all avalanches occur? What degrees? 35 and 45 degrees, right? Again, like our black diamonds at the ski resort. What were the anchors? What anchors the slope? Trees, right? But they also they're your worst enemy. I mean, they turn into baseball bats if you get taken into stand of trees. And if you walk outside and you look up at the Wasatch, we're pretty overgrown in the Wasatch. It's not like Alaska, Canada, where we have a distinct tree line. So most of our avalanche paths filter into trees. And so trees, the traumatic factor in the Wasatch for trees is actually a little bit higher, just because, again, we don't have really a distinct tree line. There were three consequences, too, that I talked about. Can somebody tell me those? The three consequences? Trees were one of them.
Unsupported slopes, cliffs.
Yeah, rocks, and the one that terrain traps. So when I'm walking in the mountains, basically all I want to do is just pay attention to what's above me. Like, is there steep slopes with not thick anchors that can avalanche down on top of me? The terrain traps or gullies. The snowpack is by far the most complicated thing we do at the Avalanche Center. I mean, you can go to Montana State University now and get a doctorate degree in snow science. So it's extremely complex. But the basic concept is when we have strong snow, really strong, hard snow over really weak snow, we're going to have a higher avalanche danger. So you can kind of see in the photo here, you can see light coming through here, and not so much here. And it's just like what we call our slab. So it's like really hard, as hard as this table. And then down here, it's like really weak powder snow or sugar snow, and we can like stick our hand all the way in there. And that's the setup for a higher avalanche danger. All these storms, they come in at different times, of course, with different winds from different directions, different snowfall amounts, with different water densities, and they layer up. And we have like a cake, right, layered up. And I can go out in March and I can dig a snow pit and I can see these different storms that happen throughout the whole season. We have strong layers and we have weak layers. Strong layers over weak, sitting on top of weak layers is when our avalanches occur. And I think this is a really good video as well. You see the slab, he's like trying to get his hand into the snow. He can't get it in. Down here, it's super weak. Just like sugar, it's like rock salt. That setup increases the avalanche danger. That's when we have high avalanche danger. And so these weak layers will form, and it's important to remember that the snowpack has a really good memory. It doesn't forget about the weak layers. But we have been working hard for 2 weeks. We want to go skiing. We want to ski steep slopes. We kind of forget about the weak layer. We come skiing along and we trigger the slide. So the snowpack, again, is not going to forget about the weak layers. And that's why you have to stay in tune with what's going on in the snowpack. You get that weak layer that forms on top of the snow, and then we put a couple feet on top of it. It's going to take time and warm temperatures for that snowpack to heal. It's just not going to heal immediately. My most obvious clue of avalanches is avalanches, right? Like at the Avalanche Center website, we're reporting these every single day. What aspect, what elevation. As I'm traveling in the mountains, I'm noting these too, because we're generally out there all day. So I don't want to get caught at the end of the day having to exit back to my car and being on the same aspect, the same elevation that I saw that slide earlier in the day, right? So I'm always noting these. Or if I'm driving up Provo Canyon and I see this, it's like red flag, right? I can trigger avalanches. Somebody tell me why this guy in the photo is walking over to the left. He's at the same aspect and the same elevation as the avalanche in the photo, but he's not triggering an avalanche. Why is he not triggering an avalanche? Why is he safe? Steepness, exactly. 18, 20 degrees over on the left and just steep enough to slide, 38, maybe 40 degrees on the right. All he's doing is just managing his terrain and avoiding any steep slopes that are above him. Cracking and collapsing. So has anybody ever walked on the snowpack, been walking on fresh snow, and heard a big woof in the snowpack? So remember how I was saying that weak layer in the bottom of the snowpack, it's not very dense, it's got a lot of air in it? What that is all the air in the snowpack escaping at once. And you'll hear a big whumping noise, and it almost sounds like an avalanche going off in Little Cottonwood Canyon. It is super, super loud, and you'll know it. It's often associated with the shooting cracks as well. So you'll hear a collapse or you'll see these shooting cracks. And this is the snowpack yelling at us, talking back to us. Do not ski slopes 35 to 45 degrees that day, right? Stay on mellower terrain. because there is a weak layer and I have strong snow sitting on top of it. Again, he's walking there, he's seeing these shooting cracks. He's just gathering this information as he's going up. This is a really, really huge red flag that I can trigger avalanches and that the snow is unstable. Wind, it takes snow from the windward side of the mountain, right, and it blows it onto the leeward side, just like this. When it does so, it breaks up the snow crystals and they bond like really fast. And it gets really hard. You get that slab, right? Deposits it all onto the leeward side. I'm going to have a higher avalanche danger on the leeward side of slopes because I've got that slab formed that I'm going to have on the windward side of slopes, right? And so over here, I have a big wind pillow. We call them wind slabs. And it's just all that snow that's been deposited. And if I have a weak layer underneath that, I can trigger avalanches. So always pay attention to the wind. As I move, wind can transport snow 10 times faster than it can fall from the sky. Wind is really easy to overlook, but it should always, always give just as much attention to the wind as you would like cracking and collapsing or as you would heavy snowfall. And as I move up in elevation, the winds start to swirl. They start to come from different directions, right? If I wake up in the morning and I look at Lone Peak or I look at the Twin Peaks and the Wasatch here and I see that, it's telling me like I should probably stay out of the upper alpine that day. Because not only are the winds coming from just one dominant direction on top of the peaks, but they are swirling as well, cross-loading different slopes. Always pay attention to the wind. So if I wake up in the valley and I walk out and there's like 6 inches of snow on the ground, there's probably like 3 times as much in the mountains, right? Or I walk out of Alta and my rig looks like that. It's like heavy snowfall always increases the avalanche danger, especially there's always a spike in avalanche danger as it's snowing, especially when it's snowing super hard. If I go in to the resort and I have lunch with my family and I come out, my skis are buried, and I see this, and I was thinking about like going into the side country or going out of bounds. Maybe I should rethink that decision. Heavy snowfall always increases the avalanche danger, especially with any type of wind. So again, another red flag. In the spring, even now actually, next week it's supposed to hit like 50 degrees at Alta, right? It's supposed to get really, really warm. What'll happen is you start to see the pinwheels. By 12 or 1 o'clock, the top of the snow surface gets superheated and it becomes wet and becomes loose, and that can trigger wet slab avalanches. Something important to remember with all this, heavy snowfall, a lot of wind, or the sun, right? The snowpack is a lot like people. It doesn't like rapid change. So any type of like heavy heat that goes on it, a lot of wind transport, or a lot of heavy snowfall, the avalanche danger is going to be spiked. So those are like the elements, right? Those are the things in the weather that I'm really paying attention to, that I'm tuning into before I even make my plan to go in the mountains. How warm is it going to get today, right? Where's the wind coming from? How much has it snowed? The most important red flag is going to be the danger rating for the day. So what is the danger rating? At the Utah Avalanche Center, we forecast for 7 different regions throughout the state of Utah, and we forecast for every aspect and every elevation in that mountain range. So I wake up in the morning, wherever I'm going, I'm first figuring out what are the forecasters saying. What's the danger rating on the slopes that I want to go ski that day, right? I like to think about this as a stoplight. In the bottom, it's kind of like green light conditions, but I still need basic avalanche skills. I still need to know how to travel safely. And of course, like, I still need to know how to rescue someone. Up top, like, if I'm not really dialed with like traveling in the mountains and knowing how to avoid and recognize avalanche slopes, I should probably go to the resort that day. What happens is people see this considerable zone as like a yellow light. And instead of hitting the brakes, I feel like they pump the gas. And I feel like they group that down in like the green light zone, and that is why 47% of our fatalities happen at considerable. And I'll never ski a slope that has a considerable avalanche danger rating because of this statistic right here. This means that natural avalanches are kind of unlikely at considerable, but human trigger avalanches, all it's waiting on is the trigger, and that's my weight on the slope. Always avoid considerable slopes, right? Because of this statistic right here. So my 5 red flags. I actually keep a card in my pocket as I'm traveling, and these are things that I'm paying attention to the moment I wake up in the morning, especially if I'm planning on going to the mountains. So again, recent avalanches. What aspect, what elevation, what's the weak layer, what type of avalanche dragon am I dealing with, right? Cracking and collapsing. As I'm walking up, generally we start walking up at like 8,000 feet. We're going up to like 11,000, right? So as I'm walking up, I'm gathering, is the snow cracking on me? Am I seeing cracking? Or am I feeling a collapse, right? I'm just gathering these clues as I move up. Where's the wind coming from? How fast is it blowing? What's the anemometer saying? How how much has it snowed in the past 24 to 48 hours? Is it going to snow today? And then again, like, what did the forecasters at the Avalanche Center say the danger rating was for the day? These clues have to always be thought about as I step into the mountains, way before I even go into the mountains, right? I can start gathering this information. What's going to happen if it slides? We've hiked for hours before, right, partners? That we've gone for hours and hours, starting at 2 o'clock in the morning, standing on top of a slope and thinking, you know, if it slides, like, I'm going to get taken into the gully and buried deep, or I'm going to get taken into a stand of trees, or I'm going to get taken over a rock band. Like, I'm thinking about these consequences before I even drop in the slope. And a lot of the times, like, we'll just back off the slope and go ski something different, just because, like, these consequences, like, it's really not worth it, right? Especially when you're that far out in the mountains to perform a rescue. So before you even ski a slope, before you're just all psyched and like ready to ski, like, yeah, let's go. It's like, all right, if it avalanches, where's the snow gonna go? Where am I gonna get taken, right? And if you guys remember one thing I tell you from the whole talk today, in the mountains, you and your partner always ski the slope one at a time in the backcountry. It's really fun to party shred and bounce with your friends, but in the backcountry, of course, if you're both skiing the slope, you both get buried, who's gonna dig you out? Who's gonna perform that rescue? And when you're crossing avalanche slopes too, it's really easy to get caught. This happens to me all the time. We're in conversations, it's early in the morning, we're not thinking, and we come up to this avalanche slope and we just start walking across it one at a time. It's just proper etiquette to say, hey, you stop here, I'm gonna cross the avalanche slope, even if you like know it's not gonna slide, and then you come across. So like cross these slopes one at a time. Because of course, if we both get carried into the trees, like we both break our legs, even if it's a small avalanche, right, who's gonna perform that rescue? So like always cross avalanche run out zones and avalanche paths one at a time. Cornices are something to never be messed with, because what will happen is all humans are curious. Like we want to see what's over the over the edge, right? What's on the other side? You approach the cornice, and 99% of the time, the cornice, it's going to break from behind you, and it throws you down the slope. And if you notice that piece of snow that he just broke off, probably weighs like 2 or 3 tons. So it's putting like a lot of stress on the snowpack. And so when it puts a lot of stress on the snowpack, a lot of times it will trigger an avalanche. So if I'm approaching a cornice, I would always like walk around this tree and not where this guy walked, because I know that that tree's not just like growing out of the snow, right? Like, just don't approach cornices. Before we ever go into the mountains, the first thing I want to do is check the Utah Avalanche Center website, .org, right? I can call the hotline. We now have an app as well that you can check, but I'm thinking like, what is the danger rating? What are they forecasting for? What type of avalanche are they saying that I need to avoid that day? What slopes do I need to avoid? And where should I go ski? All that information can be found there. Because I don't want to start my day like this kid, right? I want to start my day on the Avalanche Center website. Right here, anything you need, your one-stop shop for anything Avalanche can be found right here on our website. Just like the Rolling Stones, we're all going to make a ton of mistakes, right? But it's the big mistakes that we want to avoid, because they're still rocking, right? Like they're still playing. I saw them on their 50 and counting tour last year, and the guys killed it. It was awesome. It was awesome. But the Avalanche Center the Avalanche doesn't know, guys, that you're local, that you're a very skilled rider, that you're having like the best powder day of the year. Like at the end of the day in the mountains, like we go in, we have to avoid avalanches, right? We have to avoid those avalanche prone slopes, because like we have to get home to our families. We have people that care about us. So yeah, we have to get home. So thank you guys so much for coming. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and stay on top. Thank you. Yeah. Who has questions? I know somebody has a question. You have a question? Snowmobilers, yeah. So what's the percentage of snowmobilers triggering avalanches? They trigger the most. It's just increasing, especially with the technology increasing in snowmobiles. They're allowing them to go further and further and higher into the mountains. And all that weight, that extra weight on the slope, snowmobilers are definitely increasing. You guys have any questions? Anyone? Awesome. Thank you.